So I'm going to get this out of the way. It's very preliminary. And all analyses are subject to adjustments as a consequence of polling. These are first impressions, really. So first off, let's look at Arizona. Well, let's look at the March 22nd states first. And the first one is Arizona. I'd suspect Arizona is the liberal flip side to Nevada. It's roughly similar, but leaning more in its favor due to more progressive bases. Tucson and Phoenix are both something like Austin. There isn't really a big base of right-leaning Democrats like there is in Texas, so you'd be looking at roughly purple state demographics with a slight boost for Bernie. Okay, Arizona is a melting pot of sorts, being torn in various directions. So he can win it, but again, you're looking at the factor being turnout. If it's low turnout, then it looks like Nevada, and if it's big turnout, then it looks like Colorado. So, that's a big space, but that's roughly what you're looking at, right? Idaho, you can't rig a caucus. I don't see any reason to think it would be different than the other Western caucus states. Utah. Utah is weird. No, it is. And it's weird due to the Mormon vote. Even non-Mormons are still living in what is a broadly Mormon society. The truth is that Utah is almost like a different country. There's a lot of reasons to think that Utah would react very badly to Hillary Clinton as a consequence of those cultural differences. But it's not clear that they'd react well to Bernie Sanders. Okay, they got over Obama being black in 2008. To me, that suggests that they can get over Sanders being a Jew in 2016. But Utah is also the kind of state that would have done its homework and actually known that Obama was to the right of Clinton. I think that Sanders being a bit more libertarian, even if he's less conservative, is probably important in Utah. Some holes would help regarding margins. But he should be aiming to make up at least 50 delegates on March 22nd. And he has to do that. He has to start making up delegates. Okay, and it's got to be at least 50 on the 22nd. That's what the math says. Okay. On March 26th, you've got Alaska and Hawaii. These are caucuses, but I don't have any reason to suggest that Sanders has a real advantage in Alaska. Clinton actually seems to do better outside of the lower 48. The politics might be a little distant and the issue may already be the general. So I'm going to bristle a little on the assumption that he's going to be favored in those states. It's Alaska and Hawaii. I know they're caucuses, but I'm not willing to use the same logic. But there's Washington, okay? Washington is very, very liberal. It's practically Canada. Okay, he needs a big win here. 70% or more would be great. It's the kind of bump that could save him. And if he just squeezes at a tie, okay, if he doesn't win Washington by a substantial margin, it is a death blow. I think he should be the clear favorite here. But some polling would be nice. Assuming that Alaska and Hawaii roughly split, which is a conservative estimate, he needs to aim for at least a 40 delegate gain in Washington. So put together, he should be aiming to have made up 100 delegates by March the 26th, cutting the lead to about 215, which is what it was on March 14th. So he needs to make up what he lost by the 26th, which is a little slow. Okay, which is next Saturday. Okay, so by next Saturday, he's got to hope he made up what he lost on Tuesday. April 5th. Is Wisconsin more like Minnesota or more like Illinois? Well, let's split the difference. Let's say he aims for 55%. Again, if he's fighting hard to a draw in Wisconsin, he's not pulling people out, or she's stuffing to a point that can't be, she's just overkilling it, right? So he should be aiming for more like 60, okay, but it's going to roughly split. He needs to win at least. Okay. On April 9th, Wyoming is another one of these caucuses that you can't rig, and all evidence does point in his favor, although I would again like some polls. The goal for after April 9th needs to be that the difference is under 200. Whatever the results in Wyoming are, that's what needs to be the takeaway for the situation to remain competitive. So, nobody really knows what's going to happen in Wyoming. He's going to roughly split in Wisconsin. Maybe he gets a couple. But if he walks in, and it's 215, by the time he gets past April 9th, it's got to be, under 200 or very close to it. Now we've got April 19th, New York. He has to be aiming for 50 delegates, like to make up 50 delegates in New York. Okay, that means his goal in New York is 60%. But he split Massachusetts. He split Illinois. The idea that he can do this is perhaps bordering on the realm of fantasy. Some polling would, of course, help, but there's really no evidence at all that suggests that he can get 60% in New York. Of course, if he does get 57% or something, then you can start tweaking, and if he gets 80% in Washington or wins Hawaii huge, then he has some extra space. Okay, but his goal coming out of New York needs to be a delegate difference that is less than 150. And the percentage he should be aiming for to get him the boost at the end is really 60%. If he fights her to a draw, it's going to be the same lack of enthusiasm that kicked in last night. So he's got to win New York, and he's got to win New York by enough that he can get some excitement. Then we've got April 26th, okay? It's Connecticut and Rhode Island first. The question is whether Connecticut is more like Massachusetts or more like New York. I don't think it's much like Vermont or much like New Hampshire. But if he does win 60%, the reality is that this is less than 20 delegates that he makes up. Whether he gets 55 or 60 is really not important. He can even split them, really. He just can't lose them. Okay? So, if he wins a couple delegates in Connecticut and Rhode Island, great. There's not enough there to really worry about it. It's the reality. If you look at Delaware and Pennsylvania and Maryland is the other thing on April 26th, and that's the more important one. Okay, specifically and most importantly, Pennsylvania. My understanding is that these states almost always vote together, and that they're pretty comprehensively blue. I know that the conventional analysis will argue that Maryland should be favored for Clinton due to race, but I think the results up to this point have actually completely debunked this. I would expect Maryland to follow the same trends as the states to its direct north, because it always has before. The racial breakdown has never mattered previously and should not matter now. So the key is Pennsylvania. What does Pennsylvania do? Okay. Pennsylvania is the liberal mirror image to Ohio. Where Ohio is the northern tip of the southeast, Pennsylvania is the southern tip of the northeast. That means that you want to give Sanders a really strong chance in Pennsylvania, but that you also need to tone it down just a tad. So Clinton won Ohio with around 55%. I think it was 57. I think Sanders could win the Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware megastate with about 55%. Maryland may actually be a little kinder than Pennsylvania because it's a little more liberal. But when you work it out, if he wins those three states by 55% each, it's only about 40 delegates. So combined with Connecticut and Rhode Island, he wants to be walking out of April 26th with the difference very close to 100. So he walked in with around 150. If he can make up 40, 45 in Pennsylvania and Maryland, and 10 or 15 in Connecticut and Rhode Island, then made up around 50. So that's his goal. He's got to make up around 50 on the 26th. Now, I want to say that he wants to make it less than 100, but then the sky will fall if it's 110. Around 100 is good enough. Now, what you're not hearing is that the schedule actually shifts again in May. Okay, so it's good news for Sanders from now until about May 3rd. And then Clinton states click back in again. Clinton should be favored in Indiana. He has to hope for a split. If he can come in with a little under 100, he might walk out with a little over 100. It's very hard to see how he can win Indiana. Okay. And then there's May 10th. She should also be favored in West Virginia. Okay. Again, the analysis will say, well, West Virginia is white. Yeah. Well, thankfully it's only 37 delegates. But the truth is he'll be lucky to keep her under 60. The thing is, it's only a few delegates either way as long as he doesn't get wiped. I know that all of the models will say, well, West Virginia is so white, but I really frankly couldn't imagine much that could be less likely than a socialist Jew winning in West Virginia. Okay? Yeah, it's a white state. It's also a famously racist state. And when you have white states that are famously racist, very rural, they don't like socialists. Okay? A socialist Jew walking into West Virginia, he'd better bring a gun to protect himself, okay? So I hope he brings some serious security with him. So we want to hope it's under 120 at this point after May 10th. He's going to get destroyed in West Virginia, okay? The models might suggest otherwise, but it's bad modeling. So then we've got May 17th, okay? May 17th is Kentucky and Oregon. She will likely get around 65% in Kentucky, and he will likely get around 65% in Oregon. Oregon's a little bigger, but it's basically a delegate split, so we're still looking at a difference of about 100 or 120 or so, hopefully. Okay. Now, I skipped Guam. Sometime in May. Okay, it's 12 delegates. She'll probably win a few. But when you combine Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, you have 99 delegates. I'd have to think she's favored in all of these places. Unfortunately, that puts us back up to about 150 as the targeted delegate difference and gives her momentum going into June 7th. June 5th is Puerto Rico. She'll probably win by a good chunk. Okay? It's not because it's Latin speaking. It's because it's outside of the contiguous United States. I have not seen Bernie Sanders leave the contiguous United States. That's an interesting question. Has he ever been outside the contiguous United States? I mean, really. I think he's 74. I think that's actually an honest question. And then June 7th comes up, and he has to win over 100 delegates in California and then hobble together the rest. As was stated, it was always about California. Is that likely? I think that California is big enough and liberal enough that depending on the circumstances going in, and depending on just how close to 100 the difference is, it's plausible. I'm not going to say it's likely, but it is plausible. He may get a little lucky. If he can go into California with it closer to 100, right? If he gets unlucky, and he's going into California with more like 200, that's going to be a problem. So, you can see why the disappointing result in Illinois, specifically, even though it's only a few delegates, like I say, it doesn't really modify the math, but if he comes out of June 7th and he loses by 5 delegates, then, it's not going to make any sense to blame it on any one specific state, right? But the spring break might be something to bang your head against the wall about. Okay. Anyways, that's what I see coming up. I think he can meet most of these targets. It's when the schedule turns again at the beginning of May that things start to get a little bit scary. And at the end of it, he's got to win big in California. I think that like I say, with the right circumstances, I don't think that getting to 65% is impossible in California. Any higher than that, and we start getting into the realm of fantasy. But he's got to get close to 60% in New York before we get there. And that might be harder than winning California. So we'll see as this develops. I would love to see Bernie win on the last day by winning the District of Columbia by sweeping the black vote. That would make me feel good. These numbers have to align. The problem is that there's not a lot of black people in the votes that are in the states that are left, except Maryland. So it's if he can win Maryland. Let me put it this way, okay? If he wins all those other states and loses Maryland, it'll be quite strange. And you'll know that there's a real race problem in the Democratic Party. That this is split in ways that are quite unusual. I don't think that's going to happen. I've pointed this out in a few different places. I think that, in actual fact, if people were to audit the results, they'd find out that your Shaniquas and your Williberts aren't actually real people. That Clinton's supposed dominance in the black vote is the result of massive voter fraud. And if these people ever existed, they're all dead. But that's not something that will likely be ever proven. And likely something that most people aren't even thinking about. But I will say this. It is a historical fact at this point. Nobody questions this, but it is known that John F. Kennedy won the nomination by stuffing ballots. So, it's not unheard of in the Democratic Party primaries. It's a part of the history books that certain people might not want you to know. Yeah, that's right. You're a great liberal hero, even though JFK was a conservative, right? Your supposed great liberal hero. He won by cheating. Sorry, that's established historical fact. So, and that's just one example of what I'm sure are many others. So, again, I'm pointing this out repeatedly. I'm stating, that these results are suspicious, and it's an educated analysis and all these sorts of things. It's not direct evidence. It's implied evidence by somebody that understands numbers and saying, look, this doesn't make sense. But you also have to put it in the context that as much as Americans like to think that their democracy has some kind of sanctity to it, that it's immune from the taint of corruption, I think that we all know that that's a lot of nonsense. And that those of us that are a little bit more knowledgeable about the history know that it would not stand out in history if it turned out at the end of the day that my suspicions are grounded. It would be just another stolen result in a long line of stolen results. And when you put that in context, maybe what I'm saying comes down out of the clouds a little and hits the ground a bit.